What has Israel's reaction been in the last 12 hours?
It's one of the strongest responses that I've heard from the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Clearly, he thinks he has nothing to lose. The gloves are off. He has said that there will never be a Palestinian state in the West Bank. And he called it by its biblical, historical terms, Samaria and Judea. But let's actually take a listen to what he had to say.
I have a clear message to those leaders who recognise a Palestinian state after the terrible massacre of October 7. You are giving a huge prize to terrorism. And I have another message for you. It will not happen. There will be no Palestinian state west of the Jordan. For years, I have prevented the establishment of this terrorist state in the face of enormous pressure, both from home and abroad. We did it with determination, and we did it with political wisdom. The response to the latest attempt to impose a terrorist state on us in the heart of our country will be given after my return from the United States.
So Benjamin Netanyahu putting Western leaders really on notice there. What could any sort of retaliation look like?
That's the really big question now, and I think Netanyahu gave some indication of that because he said he will make a move once he returns to Israel from New York. One thing that the Israelis could do is annex the West Bank. And this is something that those extreme right-wing elements of the Israeli government have been talking about for months, if not years. And what do they mean by that? They don't just mean annexing the settlements that Israel already has and controls. Those extreme right-wing elements are talking about annexing the entire West Bank. And that would that would be the end of any idea of a two-state solution and an Israeli state and a Palestinian state. So that is the most extreme thing that Israel could do. But is it possible? It is possible. They could also put political, economic pressure on the Palestinian Authority. We've already heard from the finance minister. He said that he wants to crush the PA. Now, it is the Palestinian Authority that is the governing body for Palestinians. How could the Israelis do it? The way they usually do it is by withholding tax revenue that they collect on behalf of the Palestinians. They've been doing this off and on for years. In 2011, Palestine tried to be part of UNESCO, and in response, Israel held back those tax revenues for months. Those revenues pay public servants, civil service salaries inside the West Bank for the Palestinian Authority. So that puts them under a huge amount of pressure. It has been happening off and on during the course of this war, but without a doubt, I'm sure Israel will do that. But the big one to keep an eye on is, will they make that step of actually going and annexing the West Bank? Because the language is getting very strong, as we just heard from Netanyahu.
Yeah, it's definitely ramping up. When you're looking at what is possible, Australia and its allies have been talking about a two-state solution and steps towards establishing that Palestinian state. From your experience, just how realistic is it?
It's really hard to try and measure the language that we're getting from the Australian government and from these governments that are recognising a Palestinian state with the reality of what we're seeing on the ground. Gaza is destroyed, pretty much. So that is part of a Palestinian state. How can that be part of it? And then in the case of the West Bank, as we know, and from my experience, I first travelled to the West Bank 20 years ago. It hasn't gotten any better for Palestinians there. As we heard the Prime Minister Netanyahu say, we have doubled the size of our settlements there, and we will keep doing so. That's what he said. There isn't that much left of the idea of a Palestinian state in the West Bank because of the settlements, because of Israeli-only roads that only Israelis allowed to go on. And that is why we have the international community constantly, and critics of the Israeli government, calling it an apartheid state. The West Bank is divided into areas of control. Area A, B and C, it's incredibly difficult and complicated to move around. Palestinians control a small part of it. Other areas are jointly controlled, and then the majority of it is controlled by Israel. So while I think the Australian government right now is probably patting itself on the back for this recognition, they're talking it up, but the reality of how there can be Palestinian elections in Gaza, which is destroyed, in the West Bank, which Israel controls, because no elections will happen without Israeli approval, and they're not going to give approval to it. Hamas is not going to lay down its arms. So I find it impossible to see how this can actually go towards progress for a two-state solution.
Nicole Johnston, as always, many thanks for your analysis.
You're welcome.